Good evening, Nelson's Chapel. We'll go ahead and get started tonight. It's good to have you here. It seems like we went from summer to winter and no fall. But if you got your Bibles, turn with me to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20. All right, let's go ahead and open in prayer, and we'll get started. Father, tonight, thank you for your amazing love. You know the needs of our hearts and the issues in life that we face. And yet you're still concerned. Sometimes we forget that. Your compassion for us. Father, thank you that you speak to our hearts concerning things that are not only of this world, but of eternal value. Help us to look at your word tonight and apply it to our lives. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Jesus is getting ready to blow the minds of the disciples. Okay? Now remember, we have the advantage of looking back and reading back. Okay? They had the advantage of walking it and trying to come up with the understanding as it was happening. So, Jesus' view of, not necessarily view of heaven, but those that get to go to heaven probably differed a little compared to some of the spiritual leaders of that day. Some of the things that even the disciples probably had even thought about. And even in today's parable, as we look, as he gave the parable, we see that some didn't think it was fair. But that's the way grace works. If we all received everything we deserve from God, it would not be good. Think about that. If we received what we really deserve, not based on our good works, not based on our religion or activities, but based on just as an individual, if it wasn't for God's grace, it would be bad. It really would, because of the sin nature. So we're going to pick up in chapter 20 and verse 1. And Jesus is giving another parable. You all just bear with me. I've got a little mint hid in my mouth, but as I talk, it may move around a little bit, so I don't have to try not to cough as much tonight. Verse 1 says this: "For the kingdom of heaven is likened to a man that is a householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard." There's two primary, basically, groups of people here. First of all, the householder. That's talking about the landowner, the one who owned the land and ended up being a large vineyard. And then the laborers, that's talking about the workers. More than likely, there was a lot of things that went into growing a vineyard, and these people knew about that. From pruning and even setting up a vineyard. A lot of times they were set up high, and they had to come out and bring some of the good soil in from the bottom, and just carry it all the way up on top of the hill. They would platform it out. But given the end of the parable, when it talks about the heat and all that, more than likely it's talking about the harvest time, whenever they were working. But the laborers were hired from nearby towns. Like I said, this is a parable that they all understood. It would be what we would call probably unskilled trade, probably the lowest pay. And they would gather in the marketplace, just waiting for somebody to hire. That's kind of, they didn't have internet back then. They didn't have job boards. They didn't have applications and stuff like that. They just kind of went to a centralized location, and people who were looking to hire, they would show up and they would hire this one, or this group, or whatever. That's how they got their job. Verse 2 says, and when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. So in other words, the householder, the one that owned the home, or the farm, the vineyard, found a group. He agreed with the laborers that, hey, this is what I will pay. Now, a penny a day, when we read that phrase, we don't think a lot about that. What's the minimum wage now? What's that, Brooke? $7.25. I remember back when I was her age, minimum wage, I think, was
$3.50.
how much? Yeah, 3 something. It wasn't much. But they worked for a penny a day. Now, let's remember, this is talking about denarius money. This money was what they made a day, what they were offered, was the same amount a Roman soldier made. So this was significantly larger as far as what they were accustomed to. So let's keep that in mind. This is significantly larger. Very unusual for a landowner to pay this type of money. Then in verse 3, says, and he went about, talking about the landowner, he went about the 3rd hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. Now, picture in your mind kind of the time scale that's taking place. The landowner, they hire them about, say, 6 o'clock in the morning. And they say, okay, listen, I'm going to hire you to come work in the vineyard. This is going to be your pay. And it's going to be a lot more than what you're getting used to. Probably more than you've ever been paid to do a job. You know, I will take care of you. And then about 3 hours later, around 9 o'clock, he went back and hired more workers. The Bible says they were standing idle in the marketplace. Now, that doesn't mean that they were just being lazy. It means they were just waiting to see if they could get hired. A lot of times people think that they're being lazy right here. That's really, I don't believe what the meaning of that phrase means. I think they were just waiting. Looking. They wanted to work. They're there. Then in verse 4, and said unto them, go you also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. So basically he said to this new group, I'll take care of you. Verse 4, or verse 5 says, again he went about the 6th and the 9th hour. In other words, around noon and then around 3 o'clock. And did likewise. When it says about the 11th hour, 6th and 9th hour did likewise. Verse 6 says, at about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing idle, and said unto them, why stand you here all the day idle? Verse 7 says, they say unto him, because no man hath hired us. He said unto them, go you also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that shall you receive. About the 11th hour would probably be about like 5 o'clock. Right before, they had about an hour's worth of work left. And they'd been there all day. Nobody had hired them. But they were looking for a job. They were looking. They were hoping. But yet, he says, I'll go ahead and take care of you, even though you didn't get to work the whole day. Verse 8 says this, so when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard said unto his steward, call the laborers and give them their hire. Now, this is something that they would usually do, and it goes back into the laws and things of that nature of the Old Testament. They would pay them at the end of the day, because a lot of them, they couldn't afford to, hey, I'll pay you at the end of the week. You know, they had to go buy food, they had to do, things of that nature right then and there. So they would get paid at the end of the day, or at the end of the work day. And so the guy that owned the vineyard, he says, okay, to his servants, go get them here, bring them around, and they're accustomed to that. They're used to that. But at the end of verse 8, it says, beginning from the last unto the first. And what they done was, it's kind of a picture here of the people that were hired, say, that just worked an hour. I want them to come up first, as compared to the people who were hired first thing early this morning. And that's kind of how he put them in line. The ones who came in last, all the way back, and the ones who came in first, they were in the back of the line. That wouldn't cause much uproar, even though it was kind of unusual. But verse 9 says this. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. Now think about that. Here they are, they're in line to get paid. Picture in your mind, if you will, here's the landowner, the workers, and they got their big box of money sitting out here. And the one who just showed up maybe an hour ago, 2 hours ago, ever how long the time frame is, they get paid the same amount as the person in the far back of the line that's been here the whole day. They get paid the same amount. Now, if you're standing in the back of the line, you're probably thinking, wow, I can imagine what we're going to get paid. If they're paying them this price, I wonder how much more we're going to get. Verse 10 says, but when the first came, now they moved through the line, okay? They already paid off the ones who were there the last, and then the ones before it around lunch, and then earlier in the morning, or later in the morning, and then now they've got the first original group. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. This is the primary idea of the whole parable in verse 10. All receive the same reward when it comes to salvation. Everybody receives the same reward when it comes to salvation. Verse 11 says, and when they had received it, they murmured against the goodman and the house. Must have been Baptists right there. They started arguing and complaining and murmuring against themselves. Well, I can't. You know, it's funny how times have changed in one day. From when they were picked up at the very first, and they said, listen, we're going to pay you this wage. It's more than you've ever, you've never made this much. You'll probably never make this much again as an hourly wage or a day wage. And they thought, man, this guy's the best thing next to sliced bread. You know, I wasn't going to say microwave popcorn, but they didn't have microwave popcorn then. So they thought this was great. But it's amazing when it all gets down to it, when the human factor is involved, how we get so out of whack with things. And I understand from a human perspective. You know, I understand why they may have been upset, but remember, this is a story that he's telling his followers. In verse 12, saying, these last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and the heat of the day. Now, when he talks about borne the burden and the heat of the day, this is the verse I was alluding to that is probably in the harvest time of the vineyard. Because whenever harvest time came, it was extremely, extremely hot. But anyway, here they are thinking, wow, I've done all this, and yet this person didn't even do 90% of what I've done, but they get the same reward. Think about that. Reminds us of church people sometimes, don't it? Does it not? Do you know actually in a Baptist church, I can't say for other denominations, Do you know that the kids over there have as much say-so when it comes to a vote as the adults here? Think about that. We do it voting. Their vote counts just as much. Does it not? Well, they're not as wise as we are. They've not been around as long as we have. You know? Non-growing churches have a hard time, and one of the characteristics of a non-growing church is that they won't let go. You know what I mean by letting go? They won't let go of the reins. A non-growing church will never let go. They hang on for dear life. That's why they lose people if they come. Everybody has a spot. Everybody has a ministry. I was talking to a family that's coming here, that's getting ready to join, and I said, let's find you a place of ministry. Let's find you a place where you will fit in, where God's going to put you, and where you can be used. Here we see the disciples. In this story, they probably had some questions, because Peter asked a question earlier in chapter 19. It kind of propelled this parable. But here we see the original crew were really upset. Verse 13 says this. But he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst thou not agree with me for a penny? The landowner says, we had an agreement. You were excited about this agreement. So, what's the problem? Verse 14 says, Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give it to the last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Oh. The landowner says in this parable, it's my kingdom. It's my money. I think I get to set the standards. Is thine, in verse 15, is thine eye evil because I am good? Now, this literally means, is your eye envious? A little jealousy there, maybe. Verse 16. So the last shall be first, and the first last. Now, for many be called, but few chosen. This is not a business lesson in economics that Jesus has given the disciples and those that are around him. But it's a parable based on a spiritual principle. And that is, heaven is the reward for all who are saved. And let's think of it this way. From the Apostle Paul, that we would consider a great New Testament follower and saint. Would we not agree? To the thief on the cross. Remember, there was two thieves, but there was one who surrendered to Christ on the cross. Heaven, their reward, heaven, in general terms, is the same for Paul as it is for the thief. Think about that. We could probably classify Paul as in that early group who was hired very early. We'd classify that thief. They walked in as, the final whistle was going off for the workday. But yet their reward in heaven, of being in heaven, is the same. There's no lower class quarters in heaven. Remember, in context of how Jesus and the group and their background, this was You got to be kidding me. Did I just hear what I thought I heard? You know, this was kind of new to them. They don't have the benefit of living hundreds and hundreds of years later and having the Bible and reading back through and already kind of knowing the culture. You know, they were living it. So this was like, wow. So there's actually some good lessons that we can learn out of this parable. One of them is that God initiates the salvation. He went looking for the laborers. He met them where they were at. They just didn't happen to show up at the vineyard. God initiates that process of salvation. But not only does He initiate salvation, God establishes the terms of salvation. God established the terms. I didn't come up with the terms of salvation. You didn't come up with it. Who did? God did. It's kind of like when He said to them, listen, you know, you do this, this is what your reward's going to be at the end of the day. You do this, this is what your reward's going to be. God sets up the terms of salvation. It's not based on our works. It's based on His grace through Jesus. Think about that. It's based on His grace through Christ. Another lesson we can learn is that God continues to call people to His kingdom. You know, continually going. That would be probably unheard of, you know, bringing more workers in, bringing more people in, bringing more people in all through the day when you've already established a group at the very beginning. But continually wanting to bring people in. Another lesson is that God redeems all who are willing. Another lesson is that God's compassion overcomes our sin, depravity, and hopelessness. Overcomes everything. His compassion for you overcomes our hopelessness of sin. How many of us have been in church a big majority of our lives? Big majority. Not that you've been the best Christian, but we've been around church a big majority of our lives. Okay? Sometimes I think that we forget how depraved and hopeless we were without Christ. Sometimes we forget. Without Christ, we're nothing. Sometimes we forget without His love and His grace and His affection, none of us would have the opportunities we have, let alone eternity in heaven. Another lesson is that God has the divine authority and ability to keep His promises. The landowner didn't back out. At the end of the day, he didn't say, well, I'm going to scrimp here. You ever met anybody that's tight-wadded with their money? I mean, they squeak. They walk, they just squeak. And it ain't like they don't have it. But we use the phrase tight-wad. God didn't back out. He has the authority and the power and the ability to keep His promises. Now, this is where it gets good for Christians that are followers of Him. When we study His promises, guess what? That's for us as believers. That's what He promises us. It's not if He feels like it. It's not if He, you know, well, God, you got a little hacking cough today. You're not feeling too good up in heaven. You know, you got a little runny nose and a little sinus infection. No, that's not the way it works. He has the ability to keep His promises. Another lesson that we learn is that God doesn't look at religious righteousness as much as He does a relationship through Christ. One group worked all day long. Another group, they just barely got there. We would think the group over here would be a lot better, rewarded a whole lot more than the latter group. I've always heard that death is the great equalizer. But the more I thought about it with this parable, I think grace is the greater equalizer. It can remove sin, forgive us, and everyone is equally accepted. Think about that. Everyone equally accepted. I wrote this quote down today. And it's talking about salvation and people in the Bible and Christians. Those who believe, believing tax collectors, prostitutes, criminals, and social outcasts will have the same heavenly residence as the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, Charles Spurgeon, John Wesley, and Billy Graham. That's amazing grace. That is amazing grace. When we think of the Apostle Paul, we used him as a reference earlier, and the thief on the cross. Now, the thing about a lot of saints back then in biblical days, and even up till now, if you ever get on the list or an email list or up to date about Christian martyrs, and those things still take place in today's society. We just don't see them here in America. But they that actually died from what we would consider today a undeserving legal death. They died for their spiritual beliefs, but they didn't do harm to humanity. They weren't on the run as far as robbing people and stuff like that. But we understand Paul going to heaven. The thief on the cross, he was getting his due paid, tried and convicted. From a legal standpoint, yes, he deserved death. From a spiritual standpoint, we may have a hard time. We're grateful that he's got grace there at the end. The same welcoming committee when Paul entered the presence of heaven was the same welcoming committee when the thief entered the presence of heaven. God's grace is able to do that. It's pretty good stuff. Pretty good stuff. All right, tonight as we close in prayer, we're just going to let y'all sit. I know instead of making a circle tonight. Any prayer requests?